Last week we left off in a pretty bad situation. Jehoshaphat, overall an incredibly good king. He actually went out and taught the people himself to follow God, tried to uproot idolatry wherever he found it. But the one mistake he made, and it turned out to be an incredibly serious mistake, is the alliance he made with Ahab. And he took Ahab's daughter as a wife for his son. And that woman, Athaliah, turned out to be the very worst threat that ever came against the line of David. After her son became king and died in the same purge in which Ahab's descendants were all killed in the north, she took over the kingdom herself, set herself up as queen, killed all of her grandchildren, all of her grandsons who might have had a claim to the throne, except one who was hidden from her. And it's his story that we're going to start with this morning. 2 Chronicles 22. 2 Chronicles chapter 22. So, as you see from the chart right there, Athaliah was the wife of Jehoram, and after the death of Ahaziah, Jehoram's son, the rule passed to Athaliah. She took it for herself. And then after Athaliah, the line goes back to Joash. Second Chronicles 22, starting in verse 10. And verse 10 says, "Now Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son had died. So she rose and destroyed all the royal seed of the house of Judah. But Jehoshabeth, the king's daughter, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and put him and his nurse in the bedroom. So Jehoshabeth, the daughter of King Jehoram, the wife of Jehoiada the priest, for she was the sister of Ahaziah, hid him from Athaliah. So she did not put him to death." And who Jehoshabeth is, if you read it quickly, it's a little hard to follow, but she is Azariah's sister. So Joash's aunt, okay? So Joash's aunt happened to be the wife also of the current high priest. And she is the one who took Joash, hid him, and then because she was the wife of the high priest was Joash's uncle, she took him then and hid him in the house of God, in the temple. So, yeah. Yeah, there is God preserved Christ in a similar way from a ruler who wanted to kill him, who killed everyone other than him in his set. Yes. So he was hidden with them in the house of God, it says in verse 12, for 6 years, while Athaliah was reigning over the land. And we see later that He was 6 years old when he became king, so he was just an infant. He was less than a year old when Jehoshabeth rescued him. Now in the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself and took commanders of hundreds: Azariah, the son of Jeroham, Ishmael, the son of Johanan, Azariah, the son of Obed, Maaseiah, the son of Adaiah, and Elishaphat, the son of Zichri. I do not guarantee that I pronounced all those correctly, but they entered into a covenant with him. So he gets some higher ups in the army on his side, is what he's doing here. And they went around Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah and the heads of the fathers' households of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. The Levites would have had loyalty to the high priest, and they would have had disloyalty to Athaliah as the enemy of Yahweh worship at that time. She did what her mother did and tried to set up Baal worship and really promoted that. And yeah, the nation began to go in the frightening direction that the northern kingdom of Israel had begun to go some years before under Jezebel's influence. So the Levites came and joined themselves to the cause of Jehoiada. Then all the assembly cut a covenant with the king in the house of God. And Jehoiada said to them, "Behold, the king's son shall reign, as Yahweh has spoken concerning the sons of David." So they assemble in the temple. They all agree. They hail the son of Azariah as their king, as the rightful successor appointed by God from the sons of David. And Jehoiada, the priest, said, "This is the thing which you shall do. 1/3 of you, of the priests and Levites, who come in on the Sabbath, shall be gatekeepers at the thresholds, and 1/3 shall be at the king's house, and 1/3 at the gate of the foundation. And all the people shall be in the courts of the house of Yahweh. But let no one enter the house of Yahweh except the priests and the ministering Levites. They may enter, for they are holy. And let all the people keep the charge of Yahweh. And the Levites will surround the king, each man with his weapons in his hand. And whoever enters the house, let him be put to death. And be with the king when he comes in and when he goes out." So they're going to surround the king in the temple. Only the priests and Levites are allowed to come in. If anyone comes in who is not a priest and Levite, put them to death. And in this way, they're protecting the king from any stealthy attempts. Anyone claiming to be his supporter who tries to come in and assassinate him is not going to be trusted. Only the Levites are going to be trusted. Those who have made this covenant with him. Verse 9 says, "Then Jehoiada the priest gave to the commanders of hundreds the spears and the shields and small shields which had been King David's, which were in the house of God." So there were weapons there in the house of God that had been there for ages, since the time of David, not high value items. So they were never taken out as tribute for various kings, but it was useful at this time that they were there. And he gave them to the army and they stood outside the temple. And he caused all the people to stand, each man with his weapon in his hand, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, by the altar and by the house around the king. And they brought out the king's son and put a crown on him, and gave him the testimony, and made him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him, and said, Long live the king. Then Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king. So she came into the house of Yahweh to the people. And she looked, and behold, the king was standing by his pillar at the entrance. And the commanders and the trumpeters were beside the king. And all the people of the land were glad and blew trumpets, the singers with their musical instruments, leading the praise. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and said, Treason, treason. Then Jehoiada the priest brought out the commanders of hundreds who were appointed over the military force, and said to them, Bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows her, let him be put to death with the sword. For the priest said, You shall not put her to death in the house of Yahweh. So they laid hands on her, and when she arrived at the entrance of the horse gate of the king's house, they put her to death there. Then Jehoiada cut a covenant between himself and all the people and the king, that they would be the people of Yahweh. And all the people came to the house of Baal and tore it down. And his altars and his images they broke in pieces, and they killed Mattan the priest of Baal before the altars. And Jehoiada placed the assignments concerning the house of Yahweh in the hand of the Levitical priests, whom David had divided by lot to be over the house of Yahweh, to offer the burnt offerings of Yahweh, as it is written in the law of Moses, with gladness and singing according to the order of David. And he reestablished the order, the structure of the Levites in the temple the way that David had set up in his time. And all the people in the land, in verse 21, were glad, and the city was quiet, for they had put Athaliah to death with the sword. So apparently, and it's not too much of a surprise, Athaliah's reign was hard on the people, and no one was really sad to see her gone. But this restoration of the true king, especially the way that it happened, the people who accomplished it, was at the same time very much viewed as a return to the true God. They are going back to Yahweh's law, to his system of worship, to his king that he had given them. So Joash grows up from a very young age with this view, raised by the high priest, that he is God's king over God's nation. Joash was 7 years old when he became king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Zibiah from Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the sight of Yahweh all the days of Jehoiada the priest. And Jehoiada took up 2 wives for him, and he became the father of sons and daughters. Now it happened afterwards that Joash had in his heart to restore the house of Yahweh. It was apparently in some disrepair. How much of that was because of Athaliah and what she did in just 6 years, and how much was just from long-term neglect? It seems more likely that Athaliah had damaged it somehow, because there were very good kings before this point who would have cared for it. But Joash gathered the priests and Levites and said to them, "Go out to the cities of Judah and gather money from all Israel to repair the house of God annually, and you shall do the matter quickly." But it says the Levites did not act quickly. So the king called for Jehoiada, the chief priest, and said to him, "Why have you not required the Levites to bring in from Judah and from Jerusalem the levy fixed by Moses, the servant of Yahweh, on the congregation of Israel for the tent of the testimony? For the sons of the wicked Athaliah had broken into the house of God and even used the holy things of the house of Yahweh for the Baals." So it had been raided by Athaliah and her followers. And Joash cares about the house of God. It is the place he grew up, again, with the high priest as his father. His father's views, his uncle's views became his, the things he cared about. And so Joash is very frustrated that this work isn't getting done. And it's implied that the funds were not being used properly, that they were not being put where they belonged, either because they weren't being gathered properly or they were being used for other things. So the king said the word, and they made a chest and put it outside by the gate of the house of Yahweh. And they made a proclamation in Judah and Jerusalem to bring to Yahweh the levy fixed by Moses, the servant of God, on Israel in the wilderness. So Joash sees this as a repeat of what Moses did when he called to all the Israelites to bring materials with which to build the tabernacle. Remember, at that time, everybody brought what was needed. They actually had to tell the people, stop bringing things because they had more than enough. And Joash is repeating this command here. We need to repair the house of God. There's a precedent for this in our history. Issue the same proclamation. These are the materials we need. And all the officials and all the people were glad and brought in their levies and dropped them into the chest until they had finished. Now it happened that whenever the chest was brought into the king's officer by the hand of the Levites, and when they saw that there was much money, then the king's scribe and the chief priest's officer, would come, empty the chest, take it, and return it to its place. Thus they did daily and collected much money. So they made sure, using this method, that it couldn't be used for anything else, that what went into the chest was put toward this project and had no other purpose. And so they repaired the house. And Jehoiada, the priest, became old and full of days in verse 15. And he died, and he was 130 years old at his death, a very unusually long lifespan for someone at that time. And they buried him in the city of David among the kings, because he had done what is good in Israel and to God and his house. So there were even some kings recently who were not buried with the kings. But Jehoiada, who was not a king himself, was buried with them. Probably because Joash, the current king, saw him as a father, and because of the good that he had done for the nation. But after the death of Jehoiada, the officials of Judah came and bowed down to the king, and the king listened to them. And they forsook the house of Yahweh, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols. So wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this their guilt. And this is the worst fear of a parent raising a kid in a Christian home, especially a sheltered environment. What will happen when they go out, when they get exposed to other ideas, different ways of thinking? And that's what happened to Joash. People came in and convinced him, look, we know that this is your background, that this is all you've seen of Israel's culture, but there's so much more represented here. There are people here who really want to serve these other gods as well. We have to be fair. We have to be open-minded. We have to be tolerant of them. And they convinced him. They turned him away from his old worldview. He grew up and not in a good direction. At this time, he was an adult, because the restoration of the temple took some time. I'm not actually sure. It might say somewhere. It might be able to, well, does it say? Yeah. Right. Absolutely. He did. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it does seem that he had a greater loyalty to Jehoiada, and it was his love for Jehoiada that motivated his care for the temple and for the law of God and the worship of Yahweh and all that, that his own relationship with God was nothing close to what it should have been. Yeah, I'm not sure if it says anywhere how old Jehoiada was at any point. If we knew that, we could calculate how long it was. But
It had to be an adult because at 7 years old he could go all over the place and listen to the adults.
mhm.
Believe them. As an adult. I mean, I'm only saying this for this reason. Probably when you teach the tellers to look at money, they use real money. So when real money comes, they know it. So
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We do. Joash is completely responsible for that decision. He's not just he chose to be a pawn for these people. He chose to believe their lies. And God, it says in verse 19, sent prophets to them to bring them back to Yahweh. Though they testified against them, they did not give ear. So, verse 20, now the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, so the Spirit of God clothed him. So the Spirit of God came upon him in a special way. gave him words to say, gave him a role to play in the nation. And this is the son of Jehoiada. So this is someone Joash knew as something of a brother, most likely. And he stood above the people and said to them, "Thus says God, why do you trespass against the commandments of Yahweh and do not succeed? Because you have forsaken Yahweh, he has also forsaken you." So they conspired against him, and at the command of the king, they stoned him to death in the court of the house of Yahweh. And the dramatic contrast there is between this and what we saw before with them not wanting to desecrate the sanctuary by killing Athaliah in it. They took even Athaliah, one of the most wicked rulers that ever lived in this area. They took her out and killed her outside the temple. And here a godly man, a priest, is stoned in the temple itself. Thus Joash the king did not remember the loving kindness which his father Jehoiada had shown him. It doesn't mean he literally forgot, but like it says, when God remembers something or when God forgets something, he's choosing to either act according to it or not take it into account. And the way that Joash acted here was in complete disregard for the loving kindness which his father Jehoiada had shown him. But he killed his son. And as Zechariah died, he said, "May Yahweh see and avenge." Now it happened at the turn of the year that the military force of the Arameans came up against him. And they came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the officials of the people from among the people. And they sent their spoil to the king of Damascus. So very possible these same officials, these same leaders of the people who had come and convinced Joash to turn away from the worship of God, those same people were killed here. Indeed, the military force of the Arameans came with a small number of men. Yet Yahweh gave a very great military force into their hands, because they had forsaken Yahweh, the God of their fathers. Thus they executed judgment on Joash. So it wasn't even a great army that did this. When they had gone from him, for they had left him very sick, his servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and they killed him on his bed. So either he was very sick at this time or he was wounded somehow. Either way, he was bedridden. And people who were unhappy with the way he had been doing things killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David. But they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. So Joash himself had buried Jehoiada the priest in the tombs of the kings. He was not in the tombs himself after his death. Just a complete abandonment of what he had been taught, of the direction his life had taken early on. Now as to his sons, in verse 27, and the many oracles against him, and the rebuilding of the house of God, behold, they are written in the treatise of the book of the kings. So there were apparently many prophecies and oracles made against Joash in his time. Many attempts to call him back. Then Amaziah, his son, became king in his place. Yeah, so there's Amaziah right down there, the son of Joash. In 2 Chronicles 25, how much time do we have left here? Oh yeah, we have time. We're good. Nah, the bell will ring a little bit early, but that's okay. Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jehoadan of Jerusalem, one of the wives that Jehoiada had gotten for Joash. And he did what was right in the sight of Yahweh, yet not with a whole heart. Now it happened as soon as the kingdom was strong in his grasp, that he killed his servants who had struck down the king his father. But he did not put their sons to death, but did as it is written in the law of the book of Moses, which Yahweh commanded, saying, Fathers shall not be put to death for their sons, nor sons be put to death for their fathers, but each shall be put to death for his own sin. So there was an awareness of the law and a desire to keep it here that prevented him from avenging his father to the extent that he could have, and which would have honestly been expected at that time. He did not kill the sons of the men who killed his father. Moreover, Amaziah assembled Judah and appointed them according to their fathers' households under commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds throughout Judah and Benjamin. And he took a census of those from 20 years old and upward, and found them to be 300,000 choice men, able to go out for military duty, able to handle spear and large shield. And he hired also 100,000 mighty men of valor out of Israel for 100 talents of silver. So, an incredible number of mercenaries purchased for an incredible amount of money. But a man of God came to him saying, O king, do not let the army of Israel go with you, for Yahweh is not with Israel, nor with any of the sons of Ephraim. Not that they weren't his people, but at that time they were in rebellion against him. He was not with them at that time, and it would have been disastrous to bring them into battle because God would not help them, because they were not trusting in him. And Amaziah accepts this grudgingly, but he does. In verse 8, the man of God says, But if you do go, be strong for the battle. Yet God will cause you to stumble before the enemy if you go with them. For God has power to help and to cause to stumble. Then Amaziah said to the man of God, But what shall we do for the 100 talents which I have given to the troops of Israel? It was non-refundable. And the man of God answered, Yahweh has much more to give you than this. Obedience to him will lead to far greater blessings than what you are giving up. He has much more to give you than this. Then Amaziah dismissed them, the troops which came to him from Ephraim, to go home. So their anger, the mercenaries' anger, burned against Judah, and they returned home in burning anger. Now Amaziah strengthened himself and led his people forth, and went to the valley of Salt, and struck down 10,000 of the sons of Seir. So he's fighting the Edomites here. Mount Seir is synonymous with Edom. So sons of Seir are Edomites. The sons of Judah also captured 10,000 of them alive and brought them to the top of the cliff and threw them down from the top of the cliff. So they were all split open. But the troops whom Amaziah sent back from going with him to battle raided the towns of Judah from Samaria to Bethhoron and struck down 3,000 of them and plundered much plunder. And we'll do a little recap of this. And go on. Oh, we're close. We're close. We'll just finish up. Now it happened that after Amaziah, so you get a little bit of a question here. Why did this happen? Why did they plunder the cities of Judah when Amaziah had sent them back in obedience to God? Why was this the result? And I think we find out that because of Amaziah's heart, it wasn't right with God. It was God used these people as a way to judge him for a sin that he was committing at that time. Because it happened in verse 14 that after Amaziah came from striking down the Edomites, he brought the gods of the sons of Seir and set them up as his gods, worshipped them, and burned incense to them. Even by ancient pagan logic, it didn't make sense. These are gods that he just defeated. Why would he serve them over the God who had helped him defeat them? What did he hope to gain by that? And the anger of Yahweh burned against Amaziah, and he sent him a prophet who said to him, "Why have you sought the gods of the people who have not delivered their own people from your hand?" Now it happened that as he was talking with him, the king said to him, "Have we given you to be a royal counselor? Stop. Why should you be struck down?" And the prophet stopped and said, "I know that God has counseled to destroy you, because you have done this and not listened to my counsel." And what goes on to happen in the rest of the chapter, Amaziah has had a taste of victory and also has a grudge now against the northern kingdom. And he sends a message to the king of the northern kingdom, whose name at that time was Joash, different Joash, son of Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu. So the third in line from Jehu is ruling the northern kingdom now. And Amaziah sent him a message saying, "Come, let us face each other." And Joash, the king of Israel, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, "The thorn bush which was in Lebanon sent to the cedar which was in Lebanon, saying, 'Give your daughter to my son as a wife.' But a beast of the field that was in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thorn bush." In other words, you're way out of your league here. You imagine that you are much greater than you are. I am so much greater than you. Don't do this. You'll just hurt yourself. And Amaziah would not listen because, verse 20 says, it was from God that he might give them into the hand of Joash because they had sought the gods of Edom. And so through Amaziah's own folly, the nation of Judah was defeated. Israel retaliated. They came south. They broke down the wall of Jerusalem, took the silver and gold and utensils which were in the house of God, as well as many hostages, and returned to Samaria. So Amaziah followed God to some extent, but not with his whole heart. And he also, like his father, turned away in the second part of his reign to other gods and was judged as a result. And that's a good place to stop for this morning. We're getting closer to the end of this history of the Southern Kingdom. Any questions over what we've gone over so far? Yeah. Mm. Right. No, it definitely applies, and it's something that we see very clearly from this. And Joash made his own decisions. I mean, despite the best upbringing he possibly could have had, he probably had the best, most spiritual upbringing of any king of Judah, and he completely abandoned it. And it's a comforting thing and also a concerning thing, just realizing that our kids will make decisions that are their decisions, that not everything is the result of bad upbringing or good upbringing, that every person stands alone before the judgment seat of God. And that, as we learn from Amaziah, not having a heart that is fully set on God will cause you to be drawn away from him. All right, let's close right there in prayer. Father, thank you for the examples of these men. Help us to learn from them. Help us to be encouraged. Help us to avoid their mistakes. Help us to be devoted completely to you, to not be torn between you and other things, because we know that in our natural evil hearts, we have a tendency to go after things that are not you, that if we let idols into our lives, they will pull us away from you and become the dominant thing in our lives. Help us to be pure and fully committed to what you have called us to do, to be faithful to you, and not grow weary in your service. In Jesus' name, amen.